What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode. As you can tell, it's cold outside, but we're not on the ice. Unfortunately, we were able to get out last weekend, but a huge warm-up came through. The lake that I was fishing last weekend is still capped over, but I don't believe it is safe. It might have been safe today, but with the drive that I have, I didn't want to take any chances. Even with my floating suit, my ice picks, all of the safety gear I wear, I decided to stay home, and I'm hoping it looks like next weekend we will be back out in the ice. But in today's video, I'd like to go over the beginner baits. If you guys are new to ice fishing, you want to get into ice fishing, if you guys do any other types of fishing, bass fishing, saltwater fishing, any type of fishing, you know that there's baits that primarily target certain species or anything that there's different types of lures to use. So today I'm going to break down 3 beginner baits that you guys should try if you're going to get into ice fishing. So let's dive right into it. Alright guys, the first thing you guys need to figure out is, what do you want to target? Do you want to target panfish? Do you want to target bass or trout? Do you want to target pickerel, pike, muskie, burbot, walleye, lake trout? There's so many different fish that you guys can target through the ice, but you also have to have the baits for those fish species. So we're going to dive into my beginning baits that I like to suggest to people as they're first getting into ice fishing. Alrighty guys, so in Pennsylvania, we mainly target panfish, I would say, majority of the time. You can also target trout, you can target bass, pickerel. Some places you could probably get into muskie, maybe a pike, but primarily it's going to be your bass, trout, pickerel, and then your panfish, your bluegill, perch, crappie is your main forage here in Pennsylvania. And what I like to target a lot through the ice is panfish. I love to eat them. They're great. Crappie, bluegill, perch, all delicious. And they say that they even taste better in the cold water temperatures, and what better than pulling them through a frozen lake. So we're going to dive into my first method, which is targeting panfish. When it comes to targeting panfish, a lot of times what you're going to be doing is using a small ultralight ice fishing rod, and you're going to be jigging for them. So like I've gone over before, is know what species you guys are going to fish for. So then your rods, your reels, your line size, all of that is going to be based on the species that you're targeting, just like if you were open water fishing. So panfish, you're using 3-pound line, 2 to 4-pound line, I would say, fluorocarbon. And then what you're using is tiny tungsten jigs or lead jigs. You're using ultralight rods, so you can see that jig just barely move when a tiny fish takes it. And you're using, like I said, ultralight rods. So what you're going to take is, a lot of times you're going to be using tungsten. You can get lead ones, but if you guys know, lead is lighter. So when you get into tungsten, you can get a smaller size of the jig head for more weight. So it appeals more to those smaller panfish that you're targeting. But what I have here is a clam swirl drop kick jig, one of my favorites. And this is a bright green, yellow UV glow jig. So you actually can get glow lights, black lights, which actually glow these in the dark if you want to fish at night. Crappie are a great panfish species to target at night. But besides the point, what you're going to use is a little tungsten or lead jig. And what a lot of times you're going to do is, you can use soft plastics. There's companies that make tiny soft plastics, just like if you were bass fishing or something, but for the panfish world. So you can use tiny soft plastics if you'd like. But if you're just getting into it, I highly recommend go to your local bait shop and get some live bait. Wax worms and mealworms, also spikes they call them as well, but I highly recommend wax worms. So all you're going to do is tie on one of these little jigs, and what you're going to do is put on 1 or 2 wax worms. You're going to drop it down the hole and just jig away. And a lot of times those little panfish will come and eat the jig, and there you go. You can catch perch that way. You can catch bluegill and crappie that way. Biggest thing is, just like open water fishing, you need to figure out your lake, what kind of species are in that lake, and where you think they're going to be at during the time of year through the ice. Sometimes they're in grass beds that are still there. Not all the grass will die off in super grassy lakes, or they could be on brush piles that are deeper in 10, 15 foot of water. So depending on your lake, you want to be able to target where those fish will be. So that's my number one method. Now, you don't need a fish finder or anything like that. You can fish blind, drop your jig, let it hit the bottom, reel it up slightly about a foot off bottom, and just jig away. And give it 10, 15 minutes a hole. If you don't get bit, keep moving. And eventually, hopefully, you will find a school of panfish. Now, if you have live scope, of course, it's a lot easier, but even like a Garmin Striker 4, as you've seen in my last video, awesome little unit to use. You can see the fish coming in. That way at least you can tell if the fish is coming from above, below, if the fish wants to come up and eat it. Crappie love to up bite, so you can actually see where the fish is at, see how it's coming on your jig, so at least you know how you're working the bait, at least you know there's a fish below you. Whereas if you don't have a fish finder, it's a little bit tougher, you're just jigging blindly. But it's a great way to catch big bluegill, perch, and crappie to eat, or just throw back. But my number one favorite method is jigging panfish in the ice season. It's a great starting way. You can get on giant schools of bluegill, perch, crappie, and you can literally have a day catching all those fish. So my favorite way is jigging for panfish. So my second method of targeting fish is using artificial lures, just like you're bass fishing. So you can see here, this is a clam tikka minnow, which is like a rip and wrap style bait, which you just rip it up a foot, 6 inches every time, and the fish will come off the bottom to eat this. Now this is where you're targeting bigger fish. I would say bass, walleye, maybe big perch or big crappie, pike, pickerel. Even giant fish like Lakers could eat a smaller bait. Usually it'll go up into even bigger baits. But there's stuff like the tikka minnow. There's stuff like spoons. This is a spoon right here. You can get little tiny rattle trap style baits like your open water bass fishing. I have a little box right here I'll open up, and you can see here I literally have tiny rattle trap style baits. It's got the BBs in it for the rattle, and you guys can target fish through this. And the same method is jigging them. Jig them with a rod and reel. Now that you're going for bigger fish, you're gonna want more of a medium heavy backbone rod. You're gonna wanna fish with 6, 8, 10 pound fluorocarbon or braid to fluoro. Some ice guys will do braid to fluoro just like some bass guys will do. But you have to have your gear acquired to the target size that your species that you're going to catch. So another jigging method, but this one you don't have to put live bait on the hooks. Like this one's just one treble hook. Some people will put eyeballs of the perch on there. They'll take fathead little minnows, pinch off the head and just put the head on the treble, just have some live smelling bait. It doesn't have to be actual live minnow. You could tail hook a live minnow on here. There's so many different ways, or you could jig it just by itself. But I would say this is a really fun method if you can target bigger fish like walleye, lake trout, anything like that. Super fun way of catching them. It's always fun catching them on a rod and reel, which then we'll dive into the last method I like for beginner ice fishing. Last but not least, and what you'll probably see most people do that are ice fishing, is using tip-ups. A lot of people that don't go head deep into ice fishing and don't want to buy all the fancy stuff, they'll just go out and buy tip-ups. So depending on your state, you're allowed so many lines in the water. PA, we're allowed 5. So I could do 3 tip-ups and 2 rods. I could do just 2 rods. I don't have to do all 5. But what a lot of guys do is they end up buying 5 tip-ups. They go out with their buddies. They get 5 buddies. They set out 25 tip-ups, and they just sit around, BS, talk, and then wait for a flag to go off. But I love using both. So tip-ups are a great way to fish, a great way to introduce someone new or kids to ice fishing, because it's really fun. So you'll be sitting there and then all of a sudden, boom, flag, and you go running across the ice, slide across it, and you run over your flag and you hand line them in. So it's gonna be a little bit trickier because you're actually going to be hand lining them in. So what a tip-up is, it's just a spool of line underneath the water. The sides of this tip-up holds it above the hole, and what you have on here is usually a small treble hook or like a wacky worm hook I'll put on, and then you put on 2 split shots, a split shot, something to keep that minnow down there, and then all it does is sit under the ice. And then this top part spins when the spool spins. So what you do is you put your live bait on there, you'll set the flag, and when that fish takes the line, boop, flag. So you'll be running over there, and then you gotta feed the line as you're pulling the tip up out, and then you're hand lining, set the hook, but then you're hand lining it. So you gotta watch line management as you're throwing it. Are you throwing it into a giant pile so you have a bird's nest later on of all this line that's frozen together? You gotta be super careful, but it's a fun way to catch them, but it's a little tougher because it's not just a normal rod and reel, which if you guys see my last video, I have the iFish Pros, which are tip-ups, but use a rod and reel. So it's a little more expensive to get into the iFish Pros, but you get to set the hook, fight the fish on the rod and reel. It's a lot nicer. But yeah, tip up, and what you're gonna do on here is put a live minnow on here. So if you're going for crappie and perch, you could put a small fathead on here. If you're going for bass, pickerel, anything in that size, you're probably looking at medium to large shiners. And then you look at YouTube videos from Canada, they're putting on 6, 7, 8, 9-inch dead bait, and they're using tip ups to catch monster pike, 40-inch pike, 50-inch lake trout. So you guys can use tip ups for any size. The only size I'd say that you can't catch with tip ups is probably your bluegill. But big enough perch and big enough crappie I've caught on bluegill with small minnows, or caught on the flag with small minnows plenty of times. So flags are pretty much everything, starting low and perch and crappie all the way up to, a lot of times it's bass, pickerel, and bigger is what I'm catching on tip ups. But it's a super fun way if you know a lake that's choked full of pickerel, like the lake I was at in the last video. It's a fun lake to take someone new to ice fishing or kids, because a lot of times pickerel eat all day long and you can get a ton of flags on them. So that would be my third and final beginner way of catching fish through the ice. Alrighty guys, there we have it. Those are my top 3 beginner ice fishing baits or styles, techniques to catch fish through the ice. Is focus on panfish to start out. Use a tungsten little jig, add some wax worms on it, and you're good to go. You'll catch yourself a bunch of fish, and you can also catch big fish while doing it. I've caught 5-pound bass on jig heads the size of my pinky nail. So you could also catch big fish while doing it as well. And then if you want to target big fish, get into your bigger baits, your Tikka minnows, your spoons, anything like that, and go target those big fish. That I would highly suggest having a fish finder. I've caught lake trout through the ice. It's so much fun using live scope and using bigger baits on the rod and reel. And then finally, use a tip up, guys. Tip ups are a great way, entry level. They're not too expensive. You can get some pretty cheap tip ups, get 4 or 5 of them, whatever your state allows, and then boom, you guys can go out, go ice fishing, and get a bunch of buddies together, put out a bunch of flags. You guys can, catch fish all day long and have a ton of fun. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys haven't already, subscribe down below. I appreciate all the continued support. If you are going ice fishing, remember, it still is first ice, at least here in Pennsylvania. Be super safe, wear your ice picks, wear your float suits, spud, spud, spud. Be super careful, but have a ton of fun. And guys, I got some awesome videos coming up. We should be out on the ice locally next weekend, and we got an ice trip planned. We're heading up to the Adirondacks in a couple weeks, and I'm super, super pumped for that. Hopefully some lake trout, maybe some walleye, maybe some big pike, who knows? But we got a crew of us going up there, and it's gonna be a ton of fun. So stay tuned for that video as well, and appreciate all the continued support. We'll see you on the next one.